So how are you feeling?
Not great, but the show must go on.
You're such a professional. Do
I
you
know,
want to
right?
let everyone know what you're suffering from?
Beside two bad shoulders, I've had bad shoulders for years now. I did something to it. I don't even know what. It kind of got worse over time, but I had the first of several surgeries coming up. So I tried to post something comical online that led to I tucked my arm in my sleeve, like the classic "my arm's gone" gag, and
Mm-hmm.
people I haven't heard from in years reaching out like, "Oh my god, are you okay, dude? I'm so sorry for you." And I'm like, "Oh man, that backfired a little bit."
What we should have done was had someone in the background dress up like Pennywise, because doesn't he rip Georgie's arm off?
He does. He does.
Oh,
That's
man.
what it feels like inside. So, sorry for the scare.
33, 1, 0. Main event of the evening. Wednesday and half past the hour.
It's Tuesday, and you're listening to Murder Unscripted.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Murder Unscripted. I'm your host, Ed Hydock, along with my breathtakingly lovely co-host, Melissa Spivey. And I really need to start writing these intros instead of having you do it because it's
I
getting a
love
little
it
over the top.
because you don't read them.
I don't.
Usually before, like, I just throw it in there so I can just write whatever I want. And
You
you
totally
write
can.
exactly. It's great. Anyway, hiya.
Hey, well, I cannot believe that we are halfway through our block on spooky season. And I guess it's because we're recording in advance because it feels like Halloween season just started, but we're recording wise, we're a little deeper into it. So it's a weird feeling.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I just saw someone post on Facebook that there are like 80 days left until Christmas.
Ah, shut up.
And I'm shook. Like, didn't we just get done with Christmas? Like, my bank account and I are just not ready for this nonsense.
I feel like it was just Christmas, and stores don't help either. Like you walk into Lowe's, it's like their grills are pushed to one side, and like inflatable Christmas things are out already. It's like, what happened to summer and fall? It's like, screw you, Thanksgiving.
I'm just trying to enjoy my spooky season. Actually, right now, I'm seriously struggling to decide what Lucy and Milo are going to be for Halloween.
That's important. It's important.
Yeah, it really is.
Big decisions. What are they going to be?
Um, well, they don't generally wear whatever they're gonna be for very long. Like, they'll allow me to put them in costume for, like, a second or two so I can get
Just
a
for a
picture.
picture. Yeah.
But Milo, I saw this costume, and it's a kissing booth, and since he is my handsome kissy boy, I'm leaning towards that one.
Oh my God.
I don't know what Lucy's gonna be yet. I mean, she's so damn good at being a spoiled puggle princess, so I might just lean into that and get her like a tiara and sparkly little dress.
Your poor dogs. I swear to God, PETA needs to be notified immediately. What you do to those dogs.
And that's okay. Kiss the ground they walk on, wait on them hand and paw, worship everything that they do.
They
And this
clearly
is,
don't like costumes though, if they don't let you put them on.
they just sit there and look at me like they're mad. They love it.
I'm sure you will have some great pictures, and I'm just kidding. I'm looking forward to them. I love seeing dogs in costume. They crack me up
It's
so
so
much.
funny.
Well, if you have any pictures, send them my way because I'll make sure to put them in some of these episodes that air, especially the one on Halloween. And speaking of which, I wanted to remind everybody that we have a super cool guest lined up, and you'll be happy to know that this guest is finally confirmed because I believe week one it was more of a sounds good, which is always like, oh God, I got the sounds good. Is that a confirmation?
This potential guest, well, not potential, this confirmed guest is
Yes.
pretty awesome.
He is indeed, and once we tell you who it is, you guys will understand why he fits this block so well, and the block that takes spooky season to Hollywood, and we're covering crimes that either inspired a horror film or the other way around, or the horror film inspired the crime.
Yeah, I love this block. We've covered some crazy cases so far. In week one, we talked about the John List murder and the 1989 horror flick, The Stepfather. And then last week, I told you about the murder of Peter Falconio and how that case like loosely inspired the 2005 horror movie Wolf Creek.
I absolutely, first of all, love that we did a case out of Australia, because that was always, when you're working on these television shows, it's always a big limitation, because we for the most part had to keep our cases domestic, with the exception of like a Canadian case here and there. And a lot of it was because of production costs, seriously, because working overseas
Yeah.
is not cheap at all. And also ratings kind of illustrate that viewers don't connect as well to international cases. And I guess I get that to an extent, because you can't really relate to the scene, the place, the time. But I absolutely love hearing stories about how other countries handle investigations, especially, and also the differences in our legal systems.
Yeah, I agree with you. I will say I like listening to cases from other countries. I struggled a little bit with doing that case just because some of the laws and stuff are different than ours. So it took a little bit longer to kind of figure out what certain things meant. But once I got the
Sure.
hang of it, it was fun to do.
Like a road train. I learned what a road train was.
Exactly. Learn something new every day.
Absolutely.
All right, well, my case today does have a horror movie link to it, but the origin of what inspired this case actually came from the World Wide Web, the interwebs, if you will.
Interwebs.
I'm going to tell you about the horrific case which came to be known as the Slenderman Stabbings. And this case is really famous and really well known because it is pretty recent. The stabbing happened in 2014, which, as I say that out loud, I realize that was 10 years ago, not 2 or 3 years ago, which is what I've been thinking in my head the whole time.
God, honest to God, like I saw a post the other day that it enlightened me to the fact that 1980, so the year I was born, is closer to the Great Depression than it is to 2024. And it's like, well, thank you once again, Internet, for giving me yet another complex.
Okay, to be fair, though, I remind you of your geriatricness every day.
I feel it too. I like, the more people say it too, I think I'm just getting old. Like eye bags, head wrinkles, arms falling off. Like I'm just falling apart.
You can talk about your head wrinkles, but if I do, I'm a bitch. Fair, okay.
You're just a bitch.
True. And you are not getting Botox in your stocking this year.
Oh man.
Anyway. So, even though this case is like pretty famous and relatively recent, once I started actually researching it, I realized I didn't know as much about the case as I like originally thought I did.
What? Wait, what? Melissapedia didn't know a crime case, like one single crime case out of all the millions that exist?
I know.
Fraud.
I feel like a fraud.
You are a fraud.
Well, I don't want anyone else to suffer from true crime ignorance. So
Oh, that's you're doing your civic duty.
exactly. I'm here to enlighten you about the Slender Man himself, the brutal stabbing that was inspired by Slender Man, and there is a 2018 horror movie entitled Slender Man, which did not go into a whole lot. The reviews weren't great. So shocking, I know.
Yeah.
So instead of starting by talking about the movie, I'm going to start by telling you about the Slender Man creature and where he originated from. Ed, have you heard of the online like forum website called Something Awful?
Yeah, something that's a sort of. I mean, I guess sort of is the answer. I know of it. It's like a satirical blog page, as far as I know. Right?
Yes.
Oh, is it? Creepypasta. Is it from Creepypasta?
Okay, so there is a creepypasta website, yes, but actually the term creepypasta is really just like a way to refer to horror stories and scary images that circulate around the internet.
Like just a catch-all term.
Yes,
Huh.
exactly.
That's news to this boomer.
Okay, boomer.
Okay, boomer.
So there is a creepypasta website that now like houses all these scary stories and pictures, but originally creepypasta was just like kind of like a catch-all for anything scary that internet users created, and then it got passed around. Like,
so it is a website. So I unintentionally thought it was the website first. Okay.
Right. And like creepypasta got its name from copy pasta, which is like copy and paste. Like you're copying and pasting these images to other users and they're getting spread and going viral.
What are these words that kids use?
I have no idea.
You know, like copy paste, like creepypasta.
I don't
what?
know. Try researching this and being like, what is going on?
Control V, bro. That's cut and paste. That's all I know.
Well, the actual creature of Slenderman, he was originally found on the Something Awful forum. And according to Google, quote, Something Awful, often abbreviated to SA, is a comedy website housing a variety of content, including blog entries, forums, feature articles, digitally edited pictures, and humorous media reviews, end quote.
Okay.
So
it makes me feel better that I wasn't that far off from what this
right. No,
actually
you definitely weren't.
Right. I'm in the ballpark.
So back in 2009, this website posted about a Photoshop contest where they really wanted people to like submit their Photoshopped images of the paranormal. And one of their site visitors, a guy named Eric Knudsen, who went by his username was Victor Surge.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, Victor Surge submitted 2 black and white pictures to this contest, and I feel like the internet was never the same. So we'll put these up on the screen, but Ed, I did send them to you earlier. I don't know if you've looked at them yet.
Yeah, here they are. Yep.
So the first picture, it's a black and white photo of a bunch of kids like playing on a playground. There's a kid climbing up the ladder to a slide, and it looks super normal at first. And then like as you look longer in the background of the photo, you can, in the back like left of the photo, you can kind of see like a figure standing among the children. And this figure is like really tall and thin, and it has what looks like tentacles.
Yeah, it looks like he's like almost like he's a teacher of some kind. That's what it reminds me of. Like, gather round, kids. I have a story to tell you. And it's terrifying. He's 3 feet taller than everybody else in the picture.
And he's just like in all black. Like it's a weird shadowy
Yeah, there's
figure.
no face. You can't tell anything.
And then the second picture, it's like a photo of like older kids. Like I would say they're maybe teenage kids, and they look like they're walking out of a forest or something.
Mhm.
And this one, they don't look as jovial. Like
They look scared.
exactly.
The kid in the foreground looks terrifying, and then these pack of kids look like they're fleeing from something. And then all I see in the back is like it could be light coming through the trees, but it also could be like this again an amorphous type of tall, thin figure.
And in this picture, it looks like the figure has like a completely blank white face, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you can't tell anything. It just
it's
blob.
very strange. Like you're not quite sure what you're seeing. So these are the pictures that were posted to the Simply Awful website on June 10th, 2009. And in addition to these pictures, Eric/Victor Surge added little comments to the bottom of the pictures. And one of them said, quote, one of 2 recovered photographs from the Sterling City Library blaze, notable for being taken the day which 14 children vanished and for what is referred to as the Slender Man. Deformities cited as film defects by officials. Fire at library occurred 1 week later. Actual photograph confiscated as evidence, end quote.
Did anyone fact check this though? Like it has Blair Witch vibes.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
And then like underneath that, there's more text, and it says like 1986 photographer Mary Thomas missing since June 13th, 1986. And the pictures, again, we'll post this because it's hard to explain, but the pictures with this text to accompany it, it makes it all look and feel very real.
That's what they're going for. So
right. And the internet went crazy over this. And all of a sudden, people were creating their very own scary pictures of Slender Man, and they're creating all sorts of theories about him and coming up with like his origin story. And it went viral, and it spread like wildfire across the internet. And soon Slender Man became like a pop culture icon almost. And people were just drawn to him.
Well, I can totally see the allure. I mean, one of my favorite horror movie villains, I guess you would call it, is the Babadook.
Oh.
And I thought that was terrifying. I don't know if you ever saw that, but the Babadook was actually like an evil spirit that lived in a book. So it wasn't really a villain per se, but the Babadook had serious Slenderman vibes in the fact that he was just this big, imposing, like not just big though, like creepy big, like taller
Right.
than everybody in the room. And to me, that instantly kind of makes this imposing figure to anyone. I mean, you have this thing that's larger than life and terrifying and morphs into whatever you're afraid of.
I completely agree. And it's just because it's so like mysterious and open-ended, and I want to try to describe Slenderman a little bit better before I explain the appeal. Real quick, to me, he looks kind of like one of those things that's outside a used car lot.
No,
The
the
things that are like,
inflatable
"Woo!" Yeah,
inflatable car
that's what
guy.
I think when I look at him. But he's supposed to be scary, so don't think of that.
Don't think that's
But
not scary at all. They're hilarious.
they are. So basically, he's a tall, like 8-foot humanoid creature, and he's super thin. He doesn't have a face. It's just like completely blank, white, just nothing. And Slenderman is generally dressed in a black suit, sometimes with a tie, and he's got unusually freakishly long arms. But in some pictures and stories, he has tentacles that either take the place of his arms or they grow out of his back.
The suit always threw me off. It's like you have this terrifying creature, but he also has a 9 to 5. He also has 2 kids to support, and
It's very John List. Like, put your suit on, go to work.
like, ugh.
It's so weird. And I don't really get the appeal, but I know that people were drawn to him. Like, I think because he doesn't have a face and he can change his appearance, and that just leaves so much to your imagination.
Oh, 100%. Like everyone fears something different. So
Mm-hmm.
you visualize your fear differently than the next person does, and that's as creepy as it gets. I mean, he's attacking what you find scary.
Right? Like, to me, on his face would be like my Visa bill. Like, that's what I'm afraid of. But his head would just be a giant credit card. But
Commitment.
yeah, oof, yikes. So yeah, and just, whatever you're afraid of, I feel like that's what drew people to Slenderman. And the creator, Eric Knudsen, would later say that his intention when creating Slenderman was, quote, to formulate something whose motivations can barely be comprehended and which would cause unease and terror in the general population, end quote. So eventually the internet was just loaded with different stories about Slenderman and where he came from, and there were certain stories that really stuck. Like, for example, Slenderman lived in a mansion in the woods, and whenever he was around, children always seemed to go missing. And then internet users would create pictures to match these stories, and they would post them as real events, like I mentioned above. So now that we have a little bit of background on Slenderman, let's talk about how he would go on to inspire not only the horror movie I mentioned, but also an actual attempted murder. So let me preface this by saying this case is a doozy, and I feel like it brings up so many gray areas around mental health and accountability and inmate rehabilitation and charging minors as adults and just so many things. And going into this case, I definitely had a so I thought, pretty well-defined opinion on things, but after researching, I'm definitely conflicted.
It's funny because the case I'm going to be covering next week has some elements that fit into these same buckets. So I'm actually glad that we're kind of bringing it up this week, broaching some of these subjects because it'll give us some understanding before we go into next week.
All right, cool. So we're kind of on the right track. And not only that, but foreshadowing to November's block, this is about a bunch of friends.
Mm-hmm.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned, yep.
The other thing I will say quickly about this case that I had a difficult time with is I'm not a parent, so it's so easy for me to be like, what the hell are these parents doing? But I reined that in. I'm just going to keep my mouth shut about a lot of that. But we
and
can
it's
get
tough.
into...
And no one's criticizing for it, but it is, you can't, unless you're a parent, some of these things will not make sense.
Right. That's all we're going to say about that. So, our case takes place in May of 2014, and we have 3 major players in this case. 12-year-old Payton Leutner, 12-year-old Morgan Geyser, and 12-year-old Anissa Weier. And For some reason, Morgan gave Payton the nickname of Bella. So if you're watching TV shows on this case, they might use Bella, but I'm not going to use that. So just so you know. So Payton, Morgan, and Anissa on the surface were besties. However, from my experience, especially when you're that age, 3 is a crowd.
Absolutely. I have a daughter around this age, and you could not be more correct. I mean, it seems like one member of the trio is always feeling left out or feeling like a third wheel. It just, I think, is the way it is.
Absolutely, always. And actually, originally, this friendship only had 2 people. It was Payton and Morgan. And these girls had known each other, since about kindergarten, but they weren't really friends until one day in 2012 when the girls were in 4th grade and Payton saw Morgan sitting alone at lunch. And Payton, being like the sweetest kid ever, she came over and offered to sit with Morgan. And just like that, the girls were like besties. They just immediately clicked.
That's so super cute. And
Right?
it was, especially since it sounds to me at least like that Morgan wasn't exactly part of the in crowd.
She was not. And I'm not covering a ton about each girl's like backstory, but Morgan was kind of known as a little bit odd, little bit immature, and she was definitely known for her wild imagination. And I read in a few places that Morgan was bullied some while growing up, and I got the impression that her coping mechanism was to escape into this fantasy world in order to like avoid the bullies.
I hear you. And that's very common, especially with like video games these days. I mean, with how realistic they are. Like, I watch my kid play some of these games, like we're used to Mario and stuff, and very simplistic games, but you're actually immersed in these games. And when you add the capability to play online, so now all of a sudden you're connecting with people who may be feeling the same way you are about your life. And now you can completely separate yourself from real and all of the bad things that are happening in your own life and just become immersed in this fantasy world. So I get it. It's an outlet.
It is, absolutely. And I mean, it's so important for a kid to have, a creative and vibrant imagination. But while reading and researching about Morgan, like it was clear to me that Morgan was struggling to understand the difference between real and make believe.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Payton, on the other hand, I think she was just genuinely a good human. I don't think she was necessarily, popular or unpopular, but she seemed okay with that. And she just seemed to have a really good head on her shoulders for being so young. And Payton really encouraged Morgan to be herself. Don't worry about what others think of you. And I think that's something Morgan really needed to hear.
I feel like that hits home too when it comes from your peers and not your parents. Like, I think it's so important for your friends to build you up and speak highly of you and motivate you, because when it's your parents, it's in one ear out the other. But when it's weird.
Absolutely. These 2 girls, Morgan and Payton, were inseparable until they started their 6th grade year. And this is when Morgan befriended a new girl named Anissa Weier. And as Payton would say in a later interview, this is when things started going downhill. So Morgan and Anissa, they lived in the same apartment complex and rode the same bus, and they quickly realized that they kind of had found kindred spirits in one another. Both girls had big imaginations, and they were both kind of into like the morbid and macabre. So meanwhile, Morgan and Payton are still BFFs, but things are changing. First of all, like I mentioned earlier, I think 3 people in a group can be tough because someone is always going to feel like or be made out to be the third wheel. And it seems like Anissa did not hide the fact that she didn't like Payton.
Why wouldn't she like her? I mean, aside from the fact that all tweens are dramatic.
Well, that.
I mean, what's not to like?
Anissa was definitely jealous of Payton. I think she was jealous of the bond between Payton and Morgan. And I think Anissa was just jealous of Payton in general. Like, Payton was a social butterfly. And like I said earlier, she was just a genuinely kind and good human, and people were drawn to her. Whereas Anissa, on the other hand, was, kind of socially awkward and didn't have a ton of friends. And I think she just wanted a friend so bad. And when she found Morgan, I don't think she wanted to share her.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and Payton would later say that she felt Anissa was very cruel to her, But she knew that Morgan cared about her, and so of course she wanted to support Morgan's friend. And I think we all been in that situation where like one of your friends has a friend that maybe you're not super fond of, or you don't think that they're the best influence.
Well, and then when you see your friend bonding more with that friend, it's like, I'm losing this person. They like them more than me. Like, even as adults, you kind of get that jealousy. You can just,
Exactly.
you can control it a little better.
Right. So by October of 2013, the bond between Payton and Morgan was becoming more and more strained, and unfortunately, it wasn't going to get any better. It was around this time that Anissa introduced Morgan to Slenderman. And it did not take long for Morgan to jump on the Slenderman bandwagon, and these two girls, Morgan and Anissa, were obsessed. They were constantly talking about him, writing stories about him, drawing pictures of him.
So I don't want to turn this into an old man dissertation about social media, but it makes me feel like, I don't know. I feel like things are so much harder for young people these days because all of this stuff, like good and bad, is in your face 24/7, and it's accessible with like the push of a button, you know? So like, and it's all relatively unpoliced. So these ideas and these crazy theories and just stuff that may or may not even be real, all these taboo subjects and concepts are all of a sudden like sucking you deeper and deeper into a rabbit hole. And like when you're young and you have this brain that is still developing, it makes it tough not to be engrossed, you know? And it's add an equally obsessed friend, and all of a sudden this thing can take on a life of its own.
That's exactly what happened. And well, Anissa and Morgan may have been obsessed with Slenderman. Payton was really not feeling the blank face, suit wearing, spindly limbed creeper.
Yeah.
And she would later tell 2020, quote, "I thought it was odd. It kind of frightened me a little bit, but I went along with it," end quote. And she continued and basically said that Slenderman was important to Morgan, so she did try to support her friend, but it also seems like this was causing Payton to not only kind of pull away from the group, but also kind of be pushed out of the group because
Sure.
they have this new obsession and Payton's not into it.
Yeah. If you're not in, you're not one of us.
Exactly. So Anissa and Morgan are just falling further and further down this Slenderman rabbit hole. And every conversation they had somehow included Slenderman. And they spent hours basically like fantasizing over their life at the Slenderman mansion and how they're going to become his proxies and apprentices. And the way they were describing it in later police interrogations was like some sort of like MLM marketing scheme thing. They were like, Slenderman's at the top, and then he has two blah 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 underneath him, and then they have two proxies. And I'm like, are you
it's
going
like Mary
to
Kay?
Yes. I'm like, and you're gonna sell me some buttery soft leggings? Like so they wanted to become his proxies, and they would later claim that they believed they had to kill someone as a sacrifice to Slenderman, kind of like an initiation to be welcomed to his mansion.
Awful.
Yes, and Morgan would later tell investigators it was, quote, necessary to kill Payton to please Slenderman. And in December 2013, the girls, Anissa and Morgan, began plotting the murder of their, air quotes, best friend.
I don't think, is there anything that we can even compare this to, like something from our childhood? The only thing I can think of is like, remember how you turn off the lights and say Bloody Mary 3 times in the mirror?
Yes.
And like, but like that was as far as I dabbled into the occult. But even that was terrifying. And I just don't understand where those lines get blurred between like spooky fun as a kid and taking this to actual real world violence.
You know what? I can remember back when I was in 6th grade, my friends and I watched one of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. It was number 4. And we loved it, but not for the horror aspect. Like, we just thought Freddy was funny because, like, he had so many one-liners. Like, he was the funny of the horror villains.
Right.
And, like, we would call him just Freddy, you know, but we didn't, there was never a question of, is he real or not? Like, we just thought he was a fun character.
Right. So at what point does it cross over into making this a reality?
Well, as we're gonna find out, there was a lot of mental health issues going on, which just exacerbated everything so much more. So The girls, Anissa and Morgan, spend the next few months fine-tuning their plan, and eventually they decide that they would need to kill Payton in order to join Slenderman and to save their own families, as they claim that Slenderman would kill them and their families if they didn't kill for him. Which, not sure how, it went from having to kill someone as a sacrifice to now, if we don't do it, our families are in danger. Like, it just kind of keeps escalating.
It manifests, and the more they read, the more engrossed they become, and then it's easy to kind of is easy to see, now that I think about it, how to understand how this goes from fantasy to reality.
Yep, and you have someone else feeding it, so it's like two people are just, someone's constantly upping it.
Right.
So we're fast forwarding to Friday, May 30th, 2014. And this is a big day for Morgan. She had turned 12 a few days prior. So keep that in mind. Like, while she's planning a murder, she was 11 years old. So she had turned 12 a few days prior. So her parents were letting her have two friends sleep over for like a belated birthday bash. And of course, Morgan invited her two besties, Payton and Anissa. So that night, the girls went roller skating. And they came back to Morgan's house where they hung out, they played dress up, they did typical 12-year-old girl at a sleepover stuff.
This is the way it should be. So it's so crazy to hear a normal story. Like, this is how every sleepover should be when you're a 12-year-old girl. And how it spirals into what I know it spirals into is just amazing. Like, you don't see any signs of it.
Not so much maybe murdering their friend, but there were signs that someone needed to seriously sit down and talk, I feel.
Okay.
So, then they go to sleep that night. So the next morning, Saturday, May 31st, 2014, Payton wakes up in an empty room. Morgan and Anissa had gotten up and they went downstairs without Payton. And this might seem trivial to you, Ed, and to other people, but as a 12-year-old girl, it's like an unwritten rule that you don't leave your friends behind.
Well, I also feel like it's this catty 12-year-old bullshit that goes on, like, where two people in the trio purposely leave the third person out thinking it's funny, or just it's,
Exactly. And that's what I mean. Like, you don't leave a friend to sleep. Like, you wake her up and you all go downstairs together. And that, to me, is like such a slap in the face, like, as a 12-year-old. Like, I can feel Peyton's like hurt feelings from this.
Okay.
So Payton goes downstairs to join her friends. The girls ate some donuts, and then Morgan asks her mom if the three of them could walk to a local park to hang out. And at first, her mom was like, no, you're not doing that, because she had never allowed Morgan to do something like that, like go somewhere by herself. But eventually, Morgan's mom relented, and she was like, well, she's going with two people. There will be three of them, so it's not like she's going by herself.
Right.
So the girls get ready and they start walking to the park. And as they're walking, Morgan makes a slight opening to her jacket where Anissa can see a large kitchen knife.
Oh my God.
And that was kind of a signal like, get ready, we're doing this.
Wow.
But when the girls get to the park, they go into the bathroom. And while they're in there, Anissa attempts to slam Peyton's head into the wall.
Wait, why? What?
Exactly. Everything escalated so quickly. Like, they walk there, they're in the bathroom, and she just out of nowhere, like, slams her head into the wall.
That's insane. Why wouldn't Peyton run at that point?
Well, all right. So the reason she did this, like, Anissa would later admit to investigators, she said, quote, "From what I read on the computer, it's easier to kill people when they're either asleep or unconscious. It's also easier if you do not look them in the eyes." End quote.
So
That's a 12-year-old saying that.
This was literally her trying to start the process of murder.
Yes, she was trying to knock her out so she'd be unconscious.
But she couldn't, so turn it into a joke. Like,
yeah,
it's so messed up.
And like, I'm sure that Payton is like, what in the actual F is going on right now?
Right.
And so the girls exit the bathroom, and a lot of people are like, well, why didn't Payton leave? Why didn't she run? In the moment, she's a 12-year-old girl with her friends. I'm sure she's confused. She doesn't know what's going on, and she probably wants to try to stay on their good side. So when Morgan and Anissa suggest they play hide and go seek. Payton agrees.
I guess I could see that. I mean, you're especially if they try to twist it into a joke, like you're being bullied, but you still want to be included. So you're trying everything, I guess, to fit in. I don't know. I don't know.
I'm sure that they gaslit her like it wasn't that big of a deal. And again,
Right.
2 against 1. 2 people
Right.
are saying you're being dramatic like it wasn't even whatever.
Hmm.
So I can understand why she didn't do anything. And again, you don't want to start stuff with your friends at that age.
Right.
Like you don't have, I think, your own self-confidence to be able to stand up to others at that age.
Especially when these are the people that are considered your friends. Like this is,
Right.
I don't know. It's really all just so messed up.
I mean, I feel like at this point, she's just like, let me go play hide and go seek. Let us get this over with so we can go back to Morgan's and I can go home.
Sure.
So she and Anissa go hide while Morgan counts, and Anissa convinces Payton to like lay down and cover herself with leaves. So she's like hiding in the foliage. So Anissa begins to walk away from where Payton was hiding, and after a few steps, she yells out, "Go ballistic, go crazy, make sure she's down."
That's
And
horrifying.
Morgan jumps out from nowhere, tackles Payton because she's already on the ground, and just proceeds to viciously stab her best friend 19 times.
You need to stop using the word best friend because this is not best friend activity.
No, it's just horrible. Payton ended up having wounds to her legs, her arms, her torso. The knife had hit major organs, including her stomach, liver. I believe it hit her pancreas.
It's pure insanity, and I hate hearing stories about kids. You know, like when they do this stuff, they should be worried about sports and like these girls starting to talk about boys or whatever. So to hear about children committing these violent acts, I don't know. It's tragic.
It
It's the only
is.
way I can describe it.
And actually, one of these stab wounds was like a millimeter. Like one TV show described it as the width of a human hair away from a major artery in Peyton's heart that would have killed her like in seconds had it been hit. Like,
So it's strange to say she got lucky, but she was lucky.
She did. There's an interview with her and she goes, "I should be dead right now."
Wow. Age 12.
Yeah. So, and while Morgan is stabbing Payton, Morgan says that Payton asked her, "Why are you doing this?" And then Payton also said to Morgan, "I trusted you." And then said, "I hate you."
It's that trust again. We talked about this in Stanley Edwards. I mean, that trust that existed, it's hard when that's used against you.
Yes. It's terrible feeling. So once Morgan felt like she was finished with Payton, Anissa told Payton to lay down to slow the bleeding, be quiet, and they're going to go get help. Spoiler alert, these 2 little brats they took off, but they did not go get help.
Well, now they're probably terrified. And what scumbags? I don't care if you're 12 or 50. Like, call it like it is. These people are scumbags. These kids are scumbags.
These kids, yes.
Yeah.
Now the next part is amazing, and it's a throwback to our last block, I'm a Survivor. After being stabbed 19 times and left for dead, Payton manages to drag herself through the woods. She makes it to a roadway where she is found by our MU MVP of the week, Mr. Greg Steinberg.
All right.
So Greg was out for a nice Saturday morning bike ride, and actually, I just found this out before we started recording. I was just reading something real quick and saw it. Apparently, the route that Greg was taking was actually roped off for some reason, and he shouldn't have been going down that path.
No way. So if he would not have been a degenerate,
a rule breaker,
Richard Jewell would have his
oh, he definitely would.
Bicycle impounded.
Well, I'm glad that Greg's a rule breaker because
him.
He came down this path because who knows, she probably would not have survived.
This happens all the time in these stories, though. You hear it like the circumstances that have to come together for these things to be solved. Sometimes the old expressions, better be lucky than good. I mean, if he doesn't, that's luck is what it is. And it couldn't have worked out better for her.
Seriously. So he's out for the Saturday morning bike ride and he comes across Payton, and when he was still further away, he originally thought that she was just like a girl like laying in the grass sunning herself. And as Greg gets closer, he can see that this little girl is not laying there for fun. She's able to say, "I've been stabbed. I need help." And he calls 911, and I don't feel like he gets enough credit, so I wanted to make sure that, we recognize him. Like, that's amazing. He
Absolutely.
stayed with her, and he was just, that's such a sweet guy.
Good for him. That's a great move.
Right? So when police get to the scene, they immediately ask Payton, "Who did this to you?" And she is able to tell them, Morgan Geyser.
Good.
So she gets taken to the hospital. She ends up going to like emergency surgery. So meanwhile, the girls, Morgan and Anissa, are eventually found by law enforcement. They're actually near I-94, and they were about 5 miles away from the crime scene. The girls were literally walking to the Nicollet National Forest in Park Falls, Wisconsin, because apparently that's where Slenderman's mansion is.
Mansion? So let me get this straight. An imaginary internet cartoon has a mansion somewhere? And his suit, I understand. He's a businessman with important work to do.
He is.
So he must have a mansion.
So police pick up the girls, they take them to the station, and these interrogations were chilling, wild, haunting, crazy, pick one, all of the above. Like, police split the girls up, and neither of them know if Payton's alive at this point, if she's alive, dead, nothing. And another side note here, these interrogations would later come under a little bit of fire because the girls were 12 years old and they did not have a parent, guardian, or legal counsel present.
That's such a huge sticking point because I feel like I can't believe that police even attempted in this day and age to conduct an interview with a minor without a parent being present, because history has shown that nothing good ever comes from that, even if they do get a confession, because it's pretty likely, since these kids did it, and it's also easy to elicit a confession from a minor because you can just scare them into admitting something.
Right.
So it's strange that they did that.
Well, and here's the thing. In Wisconsin, a child can be interrogated without their parent or guardian. And, that's totally legal. And they did read the girls their Miranda rights. But Morgan's interrogation is insane. Like, you have to Google and just watch some of these clips. She is so calm, so unconcerned. She even comes across as bored.
So you guys got the knife from your mom's house. You guys ended up going to the park.
Yeah.
And then you guys went down by the woods. Why did you guys go over by the woods?
Because we knew what we had to do.
When the investigator asked Morgan about stabbing her best friend and how it felt, Morgan's response was to say,
"It didn't feel like anything. It was like air. People who trust you become very gullible."
These are the scariest people. These people that can talk about it.
Terrifying.
It's got Bustamante, Alyssa Bustamante vibe.
That's exactly what it reminded me of. 100%. So next, the investigator asks about the knife Morgan used to stab Payton, and she responds, quote, "I put it back in the bag and I walked. I sort of wiped it on my jacket. It was weird. I felt no remorse," end quote. Just totally says this blank statement, no like change in her tone.
Like you're talking about breakfast.
Right. So then the investigator asked her if she felt bad at all for stabbing her friend, and she responded with, "It felt weird. I felt no remorse. I thought I would. I actually felt nothing."
I don't even know how to respond to that. It's this level of cold and callous, even at age 12, is horrifying.
And just like so far removed, like you're talking about, what are you doing after school?
Right.
At one point, Morgan asks, "Where is Payton's body?" And the investigator asks Morgan, "Well, what were you trying to do out there that, you think there's a body?" And Morgan responded with, quote, "Kill her. I might as well just say it. We were trying to kill her," end quote.
It's like she has no idea the repercussions.
The way she said it was so haunting. Like,
they really had zero idea of that every word that comes out of their mouth is literally life-changing. Like the rest of their lives, and not for the better. So it's like for as smart as they claim to be or as intelligent as they come across, like use those brain cells that you have left and just understand that you're digging your own grave at this point.
And in one article, an investigator talks about how Morgan, like how she acted at the police station. She's confessing to this murder and she's covered in blood. And like none of this had any effect on her. It was just another day.
Wow.
No big. Like it was almost like she does that every day, walks around with a sweatshirt covered in blood or whatever she was wearing. Yeah.
Doesn't
who
every 12-year-old? Yeah.
Right. Now, Anissa, on the other hand, she was shaken up, but and she definitely wasn't thinking clearly. Like the first thing she asks the investigator was about, like she asks, how far did she and Morgan walk? She says something about, I'm not very fit, so I wanted to see how far we made it, how far we walked.
How many steps did you get today?
Exactly. And the investigator's like, wait, what?
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
If I just wanted to know how far I walked, because I'm usually not very athletic and just want to know.
It's so surreal.
God.
So at first, Anissa kind of keeps things friendly with the investigator. Like she's explaining about Slenderman as though he were real. And eventually she does start crying. I think at that point, like the gravity of the situation started setting in.
Yeah.
But the way she was talking about him before she kind of got upset, she was talking about him with so much like, I don't want to say like passion, but just like she knew what she was talking about. Like it was like she was giving a report on something.
Like it was real to her.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And she's just referring to Slenderman as just Slender, like they were on a first name basis. And it just came across as so odd to me. She's like, yeah, Slender lives in a mansion, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like,
wow,
that's so weird. Like he's not your friend. He's not real.
I just know what the internet has told me.
Okay. So the internet has told you that the Slender, is there just one?
Yes.
Or, okay. So Slender has a bunch of proxies, a bunch of puppets.
Yes.
See, and that to me, that's a scary sign because it tells me that Slenderman was such a part of their everyday lives. It was like a friend of theirs, like not just some wild internet story. And it's something they talk about day in and day out, that it's an obsession, and it led them to where it did. And that's an interesting point that I think we should ask our guest about coming up.
I agree. We need to write that down because we'll forget.
Mm-hmm.
So while they were being interrogated, the girls confessed pretty quickly, and their stories were almost exactly the same until they got to the part about who was responsible. And then it became like a she said kind of thing. But it was pretty early on in the investigation that law enforcement believed Morgan was the ringleader here. So while they're being interrogated, police are at like both of their houses with search warrants, and oh my goodness, they find an obscene amount of evidence. Morgan had hundreds of drawings of Slenderman and pages with things scribbled on them saying, "Help me escape my mind." And then on her computer, which, by the way, there are emails from Morgan telling Anissa to clear her browser history. More premeditation, but anyway. But meanwhile, on Morgan's computer, she has how to get away with murder in her search history.
I gotta say, I'm terrified when I die if my computer is found just because of career path.
Dude, I got you.
The things that are found on my computer. Oh my God.
Before your body is even cold, I will have that wiped. I got you.
That's what friends are for.
Exactly. So the following day, both girls were charged as adults in the attempted murder of Payton Leutner. In Wisconsin, a child can be charged as an adult for attempted murder or murder as young as 10 years old.
Wow.
What do you think about that? These 12-year-olds being charged as adults?
Man, I generally speaking stand behind it wholeheartedly, because look at some of these killers who are left unchecked, you know, as kids. Look at what they go on to do. So I do believe there's a chance for young people to be rehabilitated. Like at age 12, I still think there's time because your brain is not fully developed. What did they say? 25, I think, is when it. So, but evil is evil, and we see those evil signs in some of these serial killers from a young age. So I do think that they got exactly what they deserved.
You know, that this case is tough. I'm the first to say you commit the adult crime, you do the adult time. But god damn, the mental health struggles in this
Yeah.
case is really messing with me, like, in
Yeah.
that regard.
I understand.
So this case takes forever to, like, wrap up. The legal proceedings had to be put on hold several times because it was abundantly clear that both Morgan and Anissa were unwell. They were deeply disturbed and they needed help with their mental health. But before they could get help, professionals needed to figure out what was going on inside their minds. And on a side note, I think this part is so difficult for anyone struggling with their mental health. Like, you can't fix something if you don't know what's wrong. And it can take so long to figure it out. And
Mhm.
I know personally that that is so discouraging when all you want to do is get better.
Well, and you could see her, like, kind of reaching out for help, but in her own way. She was just searching on the internet for help. But look at, like, Cosmo DiNardo. He was getting help, but was he being honest when he was trying to
Right.
get help? So, like, is there something so miswired that even if a part of you may think you need help, but the other part of you doesn't even care? You're embracing that evil side. So it's so hard to understand. It's a difficult topic to wrap your head around.
It is. And it's such a shame that, like, your brain, which is supposed to be like your most trusted ally, is
Yeah.
working against you.
Right.
So, Anissa's mental health evaluation revealed that she suffered from a delusional disorder. And experts testified that she had a deeply held belief in Slenderman and that she was deeply afraid that she and her family would end up being hurt if she didn't kill Payton.
Hmm.
Now, Morgan was diagnosed with early onset schizophrenia, which is a severe mental disorder that affects a person's ability to think clearly, manage emotions, and relate to others. And this diagnosis, I think, came as a shock to many because in most cases, schizophrenia doesn't begin showing symptoms until you get older, like early 20s. And schizophrenia has so many symptoms, but I think the most prominent ones in Morgan's case were the hallucinations, the delusions, and just disorganized thinking.
See, but that has me thinking because you had mentioned that it doesn't show signs until you're 20. So would any of this had even come out if these two weren't being accused of murder, or at least attempted murder? Or was this a way for the defense? I feel like some of these times these things come up as a defense rather than
Right.
a real explanation.
I don't know. I will say, and I don't know if I talk about this later, but Morgan's dad was diagnosed with schizophrenia. He had been treated in a hospital a few times, I believe, like in his late teens, early 20s. So I don't know if there's a genetic aspect or anything, but Morgan actually experienced both auditory and visual hallucinations, including seeing and hearing things that weren't real. And this part's so scary, but she claims she had been hearing and seeing things since she was like 3 years old.
Wow.
And if you think about it, most children have like imaginary friends.
Yeah, I had one.
So
They're
most
not
of your friends
killers.
now are imaginary.
Yeah, so are all my current friends.
But in this case, if Morgan's telling the truth, that's so horrifying and makes me sad for her that her imaginary friends maybe weren't imaginary. Does that make sense? Like, she's seeing these things and other people are probably like, oh, she has an invisible friend. That's so cute.
I mean, it does. And that's what makes this case so difficult, I think, because mental health issues are very real. And the fact that they're so young and impressionable, I feel like it's like pouring gasoline on a fire when you add these pop culture elements and these things that get you so wrapped up in this dark side that you know you don't belong there, but it's hard to resist. But at the same time, you still know right from wrong, and that's why it's hard for me to overlook that side of it.
I totally get that. I do. And just like Anissa, Morgan had delusional beliefs. I mean, she was convinced she could communicate with Voldemort. And she also believed she could do like Vulcan mind control. And these delusions were particularly strong about Slenderman, who she believed was real and could harm her and her family if she didn't carry out this attack on Payton. And I feel like the friendship between these two girls, Anissa and Morgan, was just like you said, pouring gasoline on a fire. I saw this mentioned in a few sources that especially for Anissa, it was like their mental health issues led them to suffer from folie à deux. Are you familiar with that term? It's also known as the madness of two.
Yeah, it's like a shared psychosis, right? I think
Yes.
we have that.
You and I definitely have that sometimes, and it's so creepy, but not about murdering people.
No, about dumb stuff.
So folie à deux is a super rare psychiatric condition where two individuals share the same delusion. And it's like we talked about earlier, they just keep encouraging one another. And I can think of a few pretty famous true crime cases where this condition leads to murder. Are you familiar with the New Zealand one where it was the two girls and they murdered the one girl's mother? And that was it was made into a movie later called Beautiful Creatures with Kate Winslet and the girl who played Rose on 2.5 Men. I can't remember her name. But,
I like her though. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I do think it's easy to say that Anissa's delusion was definitely influenced by Morgan. So, Anissa eventually ended up pleading guilty to being an accomplice to second-degree intentional homicide. She was found not guilty by mental disease or defect. And in December of 2017, about 3.5 years after the vicious attack on Payton, Anissa was sentenced to 25 years in a mental health facility. However, after serving less than 4 years, she was released from the mental health facility in 2021 under strict supervision, and I believe she went to go live with her dad. So she was placed on like a conditional release, which included mental health monitoring and some other restrictions. But her 25-year sentence was to remain in effect under these supervised conditions, and like her internet usage is monitored by the Department of Corrections, and they kept talking about some sort of GPS tracker, so I'm guessing it's like an ankle bracelet.
I don't know how I feel about this, to be honest. I don't think some parental controls on your computer is the justice I was hoping for, maybe in all this.
Yeah.
But at the same time, my opinions don't matter. I'm curious to see how she does in the next decade or so, because I would not be surprised if her name pops up again somewhere for something.
Yeah, I'm not loving the short time that she ended up spending in there.
That's not a lesson learned. That's again another lesson that you can kind of do whatever you want, and it's not that big a deal.
Right. Well, in 2017, Morgan pled guilty to attempted first-degree homicide in exchange for a plea deal where, similar to Anissa, she would avoid prison and be sent to a psychiatric facility. So in February of 2018, so almost 4 years since she attacked her, air quotes, best friend, Morgan was sentenced to 40 years in a psychiatric facility, which I believe was the maximum sentence. And the judge said it was because it was an issue of public safety. So Morgan has petitioned for early release a few times in the last couple of years, most recently as April of this year, 2024. And that petition was denied.
Good.
Now, you guys, you, Ed, and I think our listeners at this point know I am all about punishments and punishing those people who hurt other people. In this case, I do feel like the girls should have been sent to a psychiatric facility rather than prison. I think that was the right move. I definitely don't think Anissa should have been released, but I am glad she was able to get some help. And you know what? It does seem like in a lot of those folie à deux cases, once you separate the two people, the issues stop.
True. I mean, time will tell, but that is a big factor.
Yeah. Well, to close out this wild case, I want to read you a bit of Payton's interview with David Muir for an episode of 2020, which aired in October of 2019. So David Muir asked Payton if there's anything that she would like to say to Morgan, her former best friend, and what a little sweetheart Payton is. She says she would probably begin by thanking Morgan, and she actually goes on to say, quote, "Just because of what she did, I have the life I have now. I really, really like it, and I have a plan. I didn't have a plan when I was 12, and now I do because of everything I went through." End quote.
Wow.
And then she goes on to say that she understands that that's probably not the normal response for a victim to give to the person who hurt them, But she says, quote, "But that's truly how I feel. Without the whole situation, I wouldn't be who I am," end quote.
Good for her.
Yeah, and like for her to say that, like especially at such a young age, because when that interview came out, she would have been 17, I think. That's so inspiring and incredible, and I think it's so important for people to take like the bad things that happened to them and realize like that shaped who you are now.
I completely agree. And these are the things that always make me kind of reel me back in on cases like this, because my first instinct is just hate. Hate these girls for what they did to Payton. But when you hear Payton herself say, "I don't hate you," and it's hard to feel so vindictive, and good for her. It's such a mature viewpoint. And I totally commend her for turning tragedy into something positive, because that's, in my opinion, all you can ask for. And we've seen it with people like Shannon, like with Jody, it's really cool to hear that she's able to do that at such a young age.
I completely agree.
Yeah, well, that was a crazy case indeed, Melissa, and thank you for diving into it. And like we mentioned earlier, we are almost halfway through spooky season and our block on spooky season. So we have one more case to discuss next week, and it's a tale as old as time. So to give it away, Lizzie Borden, we're going to be covering, because she was the OG, like along with Jack the Ripper. Lizzie Borden is the name synonymous with cold-hearted murder. And I'm going to be walking us through Lizzie's case, as well as the real life murder that it inspired. And I'm not going to lie, the real case is probably more disturbing than Lizzie's. And
really,
it is, yeah. And after that, we're going to bring in a guest who's going to help tie up this theme with a neat little bow. And again, follow us along on socials, because we're going to reveal this week who that guest is. Because for the past couple of weeks, it's been teetering on the fence, but it's going to happen. So we're in luck.
So you can find us on our socials: Facebook, Insta, TikTok at Murder Unscripted. You can check out our website and send us a message through there, www.murderunscriptedpod.com. Or you can even send us an email to murderunscriptedpod@gmail.com. And in addition to maybe like telling us your guesses or whatever for who our guest is, send us your pictures of your dogs dressed up in costume.
That's what we want to see more than anything else. Like the story that I'm going to tell next week takes a backseat. We will just run an hour of pet photos in costumes.
I would watch that all day, every day.
Hell yes.
All right, well, we look forward to seeing little Fido dressed up as...
Who names their dog Fido?
I don't know. So until then, everybody stay safe, be nice, don't hurt your friends, and remember, perverts don't wear signs that say they're perverts.
That's true. Do you think like if at age 12, if you had a sign, it would be like one of those, you get a junior license. It's like a vertical driver's license.
It's a vertical sign. I like that.
When you're 18, you'll get a horizontal one. Don't worry.
Perfect.